Hello, welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24, your latest and daily roundup from across the continent with me, Jean-Emile Jamin. Let's take a look at your top headlines. Africa casts its gaze westward as the United States gears up for its presidential elections. We look at the hopes and fears surrounding either candidate and the implications from policy to security and the economy from the African continent. Then we head to Niger, where humanitarian aid is being diverted and sold illegally in markets, endangering malnourished children. Local NGOs are urging vendors to prioritize these vital supplies for those in need. And Kamel Daoud wins the prestigious French Literature Prize, the Prix Goncourt, making him the first Algerian recipient of the prestigious award. His novel, Uri, banned in Algeria, explores the traumatic memories of the civil war, blending personal narratives with historical reflection. Welcome to the show. We start with a geopolitical angle as all attention turns to the United States ahead of Tuesday's presidential elections. It's a vote which could have large implications for the African continent, given the incredibly large economic and political influence that Washington still holds. So which outcome will be better for Africa? A continuation of a Democrat administration with Kamala Harris, or back to another Trump presidency with the Republicans? Does it in fact make any difference at all? Well, among those watching the result with keen interest are Kenya's health professionals. The US and Kenya have strong partnerships in military, economic and health sectors. Kenya's healthcare system in particular relies heavily on funding from Washington, which is also crucial for US diplomatic influence in the region. Olivia Bizot reports.
Each year, 300 million syringes are produced in this factory, meeting half of Africa's vaccination needs. It's also the leading producer of diagnostic tests for HIV and malaria on the continent. These achievements are thanks to US government and private investments that began in 2021.
What we've achieved in 4 years may have taken us 10 years to achieve without the help of US assisted funding. Once we receive US funding, it creates so many more opportunities and so many new doors so that those investments created by that US funding allows you to progress quite quickly.
The US government has also invested €6.5 billion in Kenya over the past 20 years to fight HIV/AIDS, supporting clinics like this one. But despite this commitment, former President Trump cut funding for facilities that provide abortion services in order to appease his political base.
We have really improved on HIV epidemics and prevention and management. I'm really concerned if the donations were withdrawn, all this could be interrupted, and Kenya as a country would really suffer.
The amount of support for African health projects may change, but the US will likely keep investing regardless of who's in office, as this aid isn't purely selfless.
US has also its own national interest in leveraging geopolitics in Africa, trying to make sure that it is not edged out by other emerging powers like China and Russia. And for that reason, it has made a commitment. And Kenya comes in as one of the priority states.
The decisions made in the US will resonate far beyond its borders, influencing key Kenyan sectors and impacting the lives of millions.
Well, let's add to that report with more outlook from the continent itself. And in order to do that, we're joined from Cape Town, South Africa, by political analyst Asanda Ngoasheng. Asanda, thanks so much for joining us. Africa is obviously not a homogenous continent. So many different countries with their own fears, their own aspirations, goals, dreams. But surely there are some particular hopes and reservations about each American candidate, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. What are they?
Well, I think, on one level, it doesn't matter whether it's going to be Kamala Harris or President Trump, because America will do what is best for America and America's interests. So when it comes to security, for example, it doesn't matter which president is in place, they will secure they will secure whatever bases and whatever military partnerships they can for the United States. But when it comes to public health funding, as the package you've just shown now shows us that, Trump came into power and and cut particularly funding for termination of pregnancy services, but also cut, some support at UN Population Fund, which was supporting sexual reproductive health rights across the African continent. And so if he comes back, he's likely to roll back any changes that have been made in supporting sexual reproductive health rights across the continent, which would be detrimental to Africa's whole public health sector, not just in Kenya, but across the continent. There are a lot of people who rely on America's funding in order to be able to have programs and to be able to run hospitals and other services. And so it's going to be devastating if Trump comes back and does what he did within days of getting into power the last time he was in power. With Kamala Harris, we're likely to see an increase in public health spending, hopefully, because she has shown commitment both within the Biden administration and also as an individual, has shown commitment to Africa, talking about wanting to build bigger relationships with Africa around cultural artifacts, around digital transformation, and various other industries that she identified in her last visit to the continent as important. And of course, we know that, Biden himself is supposed to come to Angola as basically his farewell or exit tour of Africa of sorts.
You mentioned Joe Biden there. That's that tour in December after he has vacated his post. I want to talk about security because you touched on that. Africa is a hugely important continent for the future American president in many ways, and one of those is its location and also where it sits in terms of that continuous tug of war with the United States, China, and Russia. Just speak to me more about that importance.
Well, unfortunately, Africa is the playground of China, Russia, and the US's war, and we are the proxy and have been, in fact, since during the Cold War. You'll remember that during the Cold War, there were countries aligned with America and countries aligned with Russia, and that hasn't changed much. But what has changed is that China has increased its influence on the continent, which makes America very nervous, and Russia has also increased its influence on the continent, and that also doesn't make America happy. And so there is this constant push and pull towards Africa, not for Africa's sake necessarily, but just for global influence and for asserting power. But I mean, we can't underestimate the fact that the continent itself is very important to all three countries besides geopolitical influence, because Africa is the home of resources like oil, like gold, like diamonds, and much of the components that are needed for technological advancements, whether you're talking cell phones or laptops, are to be found on this continent. And so it is of strategic importance, both from a perspective of the minerals and also from a perspective of securing it as a base and balancing out the power of China, which we know has a large footprint on the continent, and of course Russia, which has long held relations since during, before independence in many African countries.
And then on the flip side, though, if we look at American influence and the importance of Washington for Africa, you mentioned what the two candidates might offer in terms of their administrations and going forward. If we just look at if we look at the projects that were conducted in their times in charge, I'm just looking at Prosper Africa. That was a US government economic initiative to substantially increase two-way trade. That was under Donald Trump. Then you've also got the African Growth and Opportunity Act. That's AGOA. That was back in 2000. And you've got Kamala Harris and her US African policy. How important then is it to maintain those projects going forward for the continent?
Well, it is critical because AGOA is the biggest, trade channel pathway for the continent. It's the one way that the continent is able to get its goods into America, and also one of the biggest pathways for America to get its goods into the continent. And as I've said, a lot of resources that America needs, gold, diamonds, and even something like coffee is and does go through the AGOA. Although there has been attempts at various bilateral agreements, they haven't been as successful as AGOA in terms of pushing and making sure that a wide variety of goods are transported. And South Africa is the biggest beneficiary of AGOA, with the widest range of products compared to anybody else that is on that bill. And there's always a threat that South Africa is going to be removed because of its close relationship with Russia, because of its stance on Israel, and because of its close relationship with China as well. And so 2025 is going to be interesting, depending on who is in the presidency, what they decide to do, not only with AGOA, but also with South Africa, which currently doesn't have a bilateral agreement with the US, but relies on AGOA to be able to move its goods into the US. And of course, there are other countries
Asanda,
around
I'm
South
so
Africa
sorry. We're going to just have to wrap it there. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. But Asanda, thank you so much for your insights. Asanda Ngoasheng joining us from Cape Town there to just look ahead for an African perspective on the US elections. Let's turn to Niger, where humanitarian aid is being misappropriated, with food supplements for malnourished infants sold as snacks in markets like Maradi and Tahua. Networks divert entire shipments, putting healthy children at risk. Civil society groups and NGOs are now working to persuade vendors to reserve these critical supplies for those who truly need them.
Rakia Dansuba navigates the market of Maradi on the lookout for small packets in shades of white, orange or blue. Stamped with USAID or World Food Programme logos, these packs contain nutrient-dense food supplements meant for malnourished children. But here they're being sold at 30 cents each, despite a strict ban on trading humanitarian aid.
We've tried to understand, to trace the source of these products, but unfortunately, unless you're part of the system, there's no way to know where they're coming from.
Rakia is trying to help vendors understand the impact of this black market trade. Each pack sold is one less for the children who genuinely need it. Yet, for some families, selling these packets brings in more money than selling regular farm products at the market.
We need support to start other business activities. You have to understand that this trade is how we provide for ourselves and our children. Ideally, the government should help us move into other types of business. That way, when these sellers come back to offer us these products, we'll turn them down.
Local sources say these smugglers come from nearby Nigeria, with some backup from local contacts in Niger. Many believe that border controls are lacking and that UN agencies aren't doing enough to educate the public on the proper use of these supplies.
There's a lack of regular checks. The inspections are only temporary. This is meant for malnourished children. It's not intended for adults, teenagers, or elderly. I feel this message is lacking, even when it's handed out to the people it's meant for.
For now, neither the Nigerian government nor the United Nations has released data on the scale of this trafficking, which continues to harm the most vulnerable.
Finally, French-Algerian writer Kamel Daoud has snagged the prestigious French Literature Goncourt Prize for his gripping novel Ouri, which dives into Algeria's turbulent civil war of the 1990s. Banned in Algeria, the book follows a young woman who loses her voice after witnessing a horrific family tragedy. Celebrated for its lyrical depth, Ouri has also been praised for giving a powerful voice to the suffering of that era, especially for women. Here's his reaction on receiving that reward.
When you're very happy, it's hard to speak. That's what makes it sincere, and I'm very moved. Especially because literature has been an adventure for me since the age of 10. So I'm very moved, and of course I'm thinking about the teachers from my small hometown, my parents, my editor, and all those who have had the courage to continue this journey with me. I don't know how to be both intelligent and sincere. It's very difficult. You have to be a politician to do it.
big congratulations to Kamil Dawood for Uri, his book, which has just won that award. That's where we leave you for Eye on Africa. There's more news on France 24.